All right, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our final installment of POV's Spring 2014 Doc Chats. Today, we will be discussing documentary engagement strategy, creating a lasting impact. My name is Eliza Licht, and I am the Vice President of Community Engagement and Education at POV. And I'm joined by our esteemed panel. Emily Verlin is the Director of Programs and Communications at the Fledgling Fund. She provides strategic communications and expanded outreach and audience engagement support for fledgling grantees. She plays a key role in developing grant-making strategies and reviewing applications. Emily is an expert in the field, and we're thrilled to have her with us today. So thank you, Emily. Roberta, and then we have we're lucky enough to be joined by two POV filmmakers with incredible case studies of lasting impact. Roberto Hernandez is trained as a lawyer, and he's the director and producer of the Emmy Award-winning Prevail Guilty, which premiered on POV in 2010. And we have also Paco Dionis, who is a partner at Skylight Pictures, along with Pamela Gates and Peter Kenoy. He's produced many films for PBS, including POV's Granito, How to Nail a Dictator, and The Reckoning. I want to remind everyone who's joined us, and thank you so much, that we are going to be answering your questions as well. So please use the hashtag DocChat, either on Twitter, on Facebook, or on this event page right here, and we will get to those questions. But before we do, I want to start with Paco. Paco, Skylight Pictures has been a leader in this field for over 30 years. On your site, you describe yourselves as documentary activists. What does that mean for how you incorporate engagement strategy and impact goals into your pre-production and production work? And it would be great if you could use Granito as an example as you explain your process, and maybe just describe Granito briefly for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. And yes, like you say, we've been working in the field of what we call human rights media. You know, we really feel that we're filmmakers, but we're also human rights activists. And in the same way that lawyers use the legal strategies to advance human rights, we use media strategies, working with partners to advance human rights. That's always been our mission, and our films are a reflection of that. And Granito, for those who don't know the subject, Granito is a film. The complete title is Granito, How to Nail a Dictator. And it's a film about the 30-year quest for justice in Guatemala to try to put former dictator General Efrain Rios Montt on trial, which in fact did happen last year. But when we finished Granito, that hadn't happened yet. But we documented the efforts of several granitos, which means tiny grain of sand in Spanish, of all these different people contributing their own tiny grain of sand towards the quest for justice. And we worked, in our work, engaging with a movement for justice in this case, we use our media in many ways. First of all, there's the feature-length documentary that we start with, which is kind of the flagship for an ecosystem of media that we develop with our movement partners as befits their needs. And just to give you some examples, with Granito, for example, there's a network of community radio stations in Guatemala that are basically Maya stations that have a different political narrative than the mainstream media in Guatemala. And they took Granito, we together with them made Granito into a 12-part radio series. Because radio has a very long reach there in Guatemala. We also made a digital platform for the collection of memories of the genocide in Guatemala called Granito Every Memory Matters. where people uploaded memories in all different forms, whether video, photos, texts, old letters that were scanned and put there. And so we were trying to restore the collective memory of the years of violence in Guatemala. And also, in the case of Granito, which is sort of a second part of what is now going to be a trilogy about Guatemala, the first part was When the Mountains Tremble, which was made in 1982. And there's footage from interviews done for that film with General Rios Montt, which ended up being used as evidence in the trial. So at the trial last year, we went to film the entire trial from first to last day. It lasted 2 months. And while we were there, we decided to start putting up very quickly short 3 to 5 minute episodes, highlights from the trial, and we started posting them online and ended up with a series of 24 webisodes, which basically opened the doors of the courtroom to the world, because the story, the real story of what was happening in that trial was really not being covered at all appropriately by the mainstream media. I mean, it was kind of, we felt it was distorted, and so did many other people. So I could go on and on. There are many examples. The way we've used Granito in the movement, and to also for human rights lawyers to use in their thinking and methodology about how to bring Rios Montt to justice. But yeah, I won't go on because I can go on and on, but that gives you some idea.
Okay, thank you, Paco. I want to now turn to Roberto and ask if you could describe Presumed Guilty for someone who hasn't seen it.
So, Presumed Guilty is a documentary that we shot in Mexico City in a prison. We followed an inmate in Mexico City who was wrongfully convicted for 2.5 years. And the heart of the film is a retrial. So you get to see courtroom footage, and there's a very low use of interview footage in the film. And you get to see a happy ending in the story because we end up gaining the release of Toño, who is the protagonist of the film. And today, Presumed Guilty holds the box office record for a documentary in Mexico. A recent survey that was conducted in December 2013 showed something amazing. About 36% of Mexican adults have seen the movie. So it's by far the most successful documentary in Mexico's history, and it aired in PBS in 2010. And what we did really was, I would say that our strategy to get the public involved and get them interested in seeing the film, because it's worth mentioning that being a Mexican film and being a documentary really had a huge disadvantage in movie theaters. In Mexico, people are accustomed to watching fiction films, and Mexican films are not highly rated, or were not highly rated at the time. And documentaries have this, people attached to the word documentary, something that is educational, but it's not entertainment. So what we tried to do was to de-emphasize that it was a documentary with the publicity that we used. The poster that we had, for example, showed Toño looking at a sunset, and it was all very eliciting images of hope. And people walked away from that publicity with the sense that this was about a movie. This was about entertainment. And sure enough, that helped. Another thing that you can do is get your film censored by the Mexican government. I'm kidding, but the film Presunto Culpable was censored by the judiciary in Mexico. It was temporarily censored, and the ban had a huge effect in the audience that ended up watching the film. So I guess those are a few ideas. De-emphasizing that it's a documentary may sound bizarre, perhaps, but it was very effective. In the end, people realize that it's a documentary, and people begin to realize that it's valid as a form of entertainment, but it kills you when people are trying to choose between a fiction film and a documentary at the box office. We also made, I think, a very effective trailer, which emphasized all the narrative elements of the film. So you would see you would get to know that you would see courtroom footage, that you would see exposed, corruption in the Mexican justice system, and you would see a clear victim of that corruption, which was Toño. And also, another thing we did is we built a social media campaign, gaining very slowly and painstakingly, but very consistently. We gained a lot of Twitter followers for the film during the festival run of the film. So by the time that the film got to the box office, we were able to involve people who had seen it everywhere in the world to donate publicity, to donate some time to disseminate that the film was coming out, to distribute our publicity as well, and including also to fund our efforts to get the film disseminated in Mexico. So I think we had a very successful strategy because of all those reasons. I guess one last thought I would have on this is to be careful about choosing the title of the film. The very first thing people will see, and that decides who is going to want to watch the film. And I think we were lucky to think about that a lot. Initially, we had a very bad title for our film, and we ended up choosing something that was that had a lot more appeal.
Okay, thank you. You and your partner Lyda have called yourselves accidental filmmakers. Can you talk a little bit about Presumed Guilty and what brought you to that story?
Yes, well, we started filming by accident, I would say, because we were contacted by somebody who was in the prison system, who was already convicted for a murder, and it was a phone call, and we decided to start taping that phone call and subsequent phone calls that we received. And we never initially imagined that it was going to add up to a feature-length documentary. And that was a magical thing because we started taping in 2006, and we ended up launching the film in 2011. We had like a good 2.5-year period of taping our phone calls with Toño, and then things started happening in the case. Initially he was convicted, spent 20 years in prison, and we managed to get a retrial. And so just because of the mere passage of time, things start happening, and then you can build a narrative about those events. And those events become significant because of the long-term follow-up observation that we had a chance to implement. So after 2.5 years, an editor named Felipe Gomez and some colleagues made us realize that we actually had enough material to make a feature-length picture. So that's why we call ourselves accidental filmmakers.
Have you defined long-term change and the impact that you wanted to make when you started filming?
In my heart, I knew that the film would have an impact, but it seemed sort of extravagant to say so to my colleagues. What I did hope to achieve is that it would be seen by a large amount of Mexicans. I wasn't hoping for policy change, for example, but some of it has occurred as a result of the film. So in terms of the audience, I've mentioned 36% of Mexican adults have seen the film, which is an incredibly high amount of people. In terms of policy change, one of the things we achieved is that we kicked into gear some reforms about the judiciary in Mexico. It's worth mentioning that but when Presunto Culpable was broadcast in Mexican television and when it was in theaters, about 70% of the people who saw our film had never seen a documentary before in Mexico. There's a survey that came out, and most of the viewers of Presunto Culpable had only seen soccer games and soap operas. And this is important to know because there's very little access to documentary in a country like Mexico. We don't have a strong public television. and it's very rare for the private television companies that dominate the market. It's very rare for them to broadcast a film. So we were a first in many respects. Specifically, Prevail was broadcast by Televisa on Channel 2, which is, Channel 2 is the most seen, coveted channel in Mexico, with 60% of the audience, I believe. And that channel broadcast our film.
Okay.
That one night we reached like 13 million viewers thanks to that.
Thank you. Paco, when you are starting to plan your campaigns, do you have impact goals in your head immediately?
Yes, we have impact goals, and some of them you can think about in advance, and others are really, they come in reaction to events that happen after the film comes out. So I would say when lawyers that were leading the case against Rios Montt, the genocide case, asked us if we might have outtakes that they might be able to use as evidence in the case, and we looked through our outtakes from 30 years ago and found the material that we gave them, which they used as evidence. I mean, obviously in our minds it was a goal that, wow, we hope this helps convict the general. But the likelihood at the time of beginning the film that the trial would actually happen, would basically go against all of Guatemalan history. So when the trial finally happened, and we saw it at one point during the trial, our footage projected in the courtroom, that was quite a thrilling moment from a documentary point of view.
Yeah.
In 1982, when Pam did that interview with Rios Montt, of course she had no idea that this would ever come to pass. And I think that speaks to another aspect of, I would say, social justice, filmmaking, and the commitment that are involved. I mean, these are long-term commitments, right? I mean, Skylight's been involved with the Guatemalan movement for over 30 years. In Peru, we continue to be involved there after making State of Fear about the 52 Commission, and so on and so forth. So what we have is we have a team at Skylight that is focused on outreach and reacting to outreach and editing short films. We did, for example, with Fledgling Fund, Emily, I'm sure remembers, we made some short films with Facing History and ourselves that was something that came about after we finished the film, but we were thinking about it already before we finished the main feature-length documentary. And we like to hold what we call outreach summits during the making of the film with partners locally and also internationally. So a combination of international and local human rights organizations, civil society groups. And so in those we often just share certain assemblies of footage to receive their commentary and thoughts, and what other kinds of short films might be made, or mobile strategies, etc. That we work these out with a whole bunch of outreach partners that
That's
we
great.
gather around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Emily, I think these are two very distinct and sort of special cases of filmmakers who went in with goals in mind, and not every person who's making a film necessarily has long-term impact and strategy on the brain. Do you, in your experience, have any suggestions or tips for filmmakers who are just starting out in the pre-production phase?
Yeah, in the pre-production phase. I mean, I love that if there are people on this call that are in about impact, then you're doing the right thing. That's great. I think the most important thing to note here is that the first thing that has to happen is a really, really deep assessment of where you're at, what your goals are, and being really, really honest about them. You don't have to check the box of wanting to achieve social change all the time. Not every film is supposed to do that, and not even every social issue film is supposed to do that. And so taking a really honest assessment of they are activists in nature, they are, you know, in every kind of goal you can imagine, and being really honest about those, and then saying, okay, well, if those are our goals, here's what we're bringing to the table. We have these kinds of resources, financially, human resources, time, energy, interest, passion, experience. What are you bringing to the table as a team? And then try to figure out, okay, this is what we've got. Here are our gaps. And I would say, you know, the first and, you know, most important thing is a really deep assessment of what you need to achieve your goals. And is it a domestic and international summit to bring your partners together and talk about the issues? What is the way forward? And I would say, you know, there's no kind of one-size-fits-all about planning in the pre-production phase. It really is, you know, you have to kind of assess not only your goals and your team, but also the state of the movement and what's happening politically and socially with the issue, what's happening, you know, all of the different factors and inputs that make up the output that you need to eventually get to. And that's a very vague answer, but it's true. There's no one-size-fits-all.
Yeah. Do you think it's even possible to plan 5, 10, 20 years into the future for an engagement campaign?
I think it's sweet that you would try. But I think all of us in the film world know that there are just so many factors that could happen, for better or worse.
Right.
I'm working on planning a that is windfalls and pitfalls, and thinking in advance about all the things that could happen to take your film to another stratosphere, and all of the things that could happen to hold you back. And you can't plan for them, but you can start to think about them, you know, in a really vague sense of the word again. I think you should have long-term goals, and I would say long-term is probably, you know, 5 to 20 years, somewhere in there. But it's good to have goals, but it's also good to be really flexible and go with the movement. And I think, you know, we work really closely with all of our grantees on coming up with the plan for their campaign, right? What are you going to do with fledgling fund support, and how are you going to leverage it? But then I think our next conversation is about, okay, well, that's a great plan. Let's start off with that, and then let's be really flexible because things change.
Right.
Yeah. What are the best practices that you've seen for measuring a film's impact over the long haul?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
You're gonna hate me at the end of this answer too. There is no one answer. You know, and I think that's the point of this, is that it's almost like saying, what are the best practices in social change? I mean, there's so many ways to do it, and this is a really big space with a lot of different issues. And, you know, once you answer all of those things that I just talked about, it's about saying, okay, well, here's what we're trying to achieve. What are the different ways that we would measure that achievement? Is it something like Twitter followers, which is very, very easy to measure, or is it something more like a really broad-based, qualitative survey that reaches? Roberto, you said that it was something like 35% of adults in Mexico had seen your film. Oh my gosh, what an amazing opportunity to do a survey! My goodness, and figure out what that meant to them. I mean, I think about things like that. So it totally depends on your goals. It totally depends on your resources. You have to be really realistic. I mean, one thing that we just did with the film Private Violence that I think is kind of interesting is they did a sort of a ballot-style survey at True False Film Festival when they were there, and they passed it out to everyone in the audience, and it was at a massive theater. I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like 1,200 people in the theater or something like that, and there were 2 screenings that they did it at. Passed the ballot-style survey out to as they walked in, and then collected it on the way out. And instead of having to mark with a pen, it was like they ripped to their answer. So about how the film affected them, what did they learn, things like that. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to do it with a lot of different budgets, and I think the most important thing is that the way that you do it matches your goals, and that the way that you're doing it also continues to feed your campaign, so that you're not just doing it at the end when you're just trying to report to your funders about what you did, but you're doing it throughout so that it continues to change and help your campaign evolve.
I think that's exactly right. We don't hate you for that answer. We love you for that answer. Thank you. And this is for, Paco or Roberto, like, how are you measuring the impact, or are you measuring the impact?
Well, sorry, Roberto. So I'll just go ahead. Okay. Well, we do surveys, like Emily was just saying. Sometimes at screenings, we have one thing we do is we distribute our films for free to NGOs and civil society organizations that are connected to the movement, and we work with people in the movement to talk about structured screenings with feedback afterwards. We have Google Docs where people fill out surveys. Not all the individual members of the audience, but the screening leader, who takes the surveys collected at the screening, puts that information into our Google Doc database. That's one way. Other measurements are, what I consider standard at this point, right? Like I said, Twitter followers, Facebook activity, etc.
Sure.
And then there are things where you can't really measure the impact. One of the things that we do is we find the biggest bootlegger in the country, like say Guatemala or Peru are two examples, and we give in Guatemala it's a guy called El Buki, and we give him a good master, a good copy of our film, and ask him to please, put out good copies, and through a guy like El Buki, the film goes out to all the markets, the street markets in the country, and to us that's a very important point of distribution, and because really what you're doing in many of these cases is you're fighting a battle for the narrative. In Guatemala, since the Rios Montt trial ended in his conviction, and then 10 days later, the Constitutional Court was pressured to vacate the verdict, not on evidentiary grounds, just on a technicality. Anyway, it's unleashed a huge battle for the narrative in Guatemala, whether there was or was not a genocide. So, the business, military, and power elite have thrown all of their ammunition in the corporate media that they own to say there was never a genocide in Guatemala. They're trying to erase the trial. Meanwhile, the indigenous movement and the Maya people, and I would say a big section of Guatemalan youth, want the genocide to be acknowledged, the past to be faced, and so we feel that our role there is in many different ways to help build that narrative with them. To have this alternative counter-narrative out there against the really heavy-duty one that comes from the powerful.
So surveys, metrics, but also just in terms of how it's getting out there in Guatemala. Yeah.
Yes. Well, with the Guatemalans, they just put up a Facebook page a few days ago to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of the day Rios Montt was sentenced. And it's already gotten a huge amount of people on it and a huge amount of content going up. People are putting up songs, videos, photos, comments. It's amazing. And it's just, regardless of what the Guatemalan justice system did to try to reverse the verdict, it's going to be, they're not going to be able to. And I think this Facebook page shows it.
Okay. Roberto, anything sort of different from the metrics that were just described by Paco that you're doing to measure?
I would strongly advise, and I think this is consistent with what others have said, use surveys. It's not an expensive. It's not an expensive thing. It's not an expensive thing to do. Everybody can afford to do a survey. You can get better or have a higher quality survey with a little bit more money, but everybody can afford to interview 30 persons or 20 persons, and it's very useful during production, during screenings at festivals, to test your publicity, to test effects in your audience, to test outcomes in the people you care about. So, for example, with Presunto Culpable, with Presumed Guilty, during production, because it was a complicated film to edit, I used surveys to check whether my viewers were understanding what was going on in the film. And I made editorial decisions based on that. If they didn't understand what a person's role was in the film, I worked harder at it, or I removed characters. During festivals, we gauge whether the audience liked our film and how much. And we tried to guess what audience we would be able to reach when the film came to Mexico. And we even decided to reopen the edit of the film after it was very successful, but not quite as successful as we wanted it to be with audiences.
Sure.
We also have used surveys. Well, thanks to Parametria, which is a survey company in Mexico, we have now this data that 36% of Mexican adults have seen the film. So now we know what the reach of the film was. And most recently, we did a survey in prisons in Mexico. And we asked inmates whether they had seen the film, for example. And we got amazing responses, like 70% of the inmates that to whom we deployed the survey had seen the film. Or somehow had access to the film. And then we also used surveys to test change in the justice system. This change, I don't think it's as a result of the film, but as a result of reforms, and we are testing whether reforms are effective in Mexico. So one of the issues the film presented was that in Mexico we have trials without judges present in trial, and so we asked inmates whether there was a judge present during their trial. We are seeing huge changes there. So there's many ways to test change, and I think surveys are a really useful tool to test production, to make editorial decisions, to test change. Yeah.
Hey, Eliza, before we get off that subject, can I say just one additional thing about this?
Absolutely.
I would actually love to challenge our field and people on this call to maybe even step away from the words metrics and evaluation and these things that sound really scary, frankly. Like I don't want to be put up to a metric or an evaluation. It sounds awful. So I've been using instead the terms, or asking filmmakers to tell the story of their impact, because that's what you all do best, is tell stories. And when I think about the films that have meant the most to me and have meant the most to the Fledgling Fund as far as the impact that they've had, you can't put it into a number or a metric. It really is about sitting down with that person and hearing about the impact that they've had. And yes, we can't all do that. And so I would say, when I think about case studies that I've read about Invisible War or like 100 different films, the evaluations that I find the best are the stories that are told about the impact that film has had. And so that incorporates quantitative things like results from surveys and things like that, but it's also that juicy qualitative story about how when you met the vice president or the secretary of defense in an elevator and told them about your film, he, and so it's those kinds of things that I think are sometimes the most powerful, and I would hate to lose that in a conversation about just the sort of putting impact into a box like metrics.
Right.
I'm really glad that you said that, and I'm going to move on to a viewer's question, not about metrics. We're skipping that one. What types? This is from Sabia Khan, and the question is: what types of media org partnerships have been the most fruitful in terms of impact? Or what do organizations and doc makers need to bring to the table for maximum impact? Anyone want to take a stab at that? All right.
Yeah. For us, the most important and successful partnership we had was with Cinépolis, which is a theatrical chain in Mexico. I think it's the 5th largest theatrical chain. We got in touch with them thanks to a film festival where the owner of the chain saw the film, and he decided that the film had to be seen by everybody. And 2 years down the road, later, it ended up being the case that Cinépolis decided to distribute the film on a pro bono basis. So that partnership really opened up a range of other partnerships with publicity companies, with companies that make trailers, with other theater chains, and that had a huge, huge impact in the audience that our film was eventually able to reach. So I would say that it's important to understand the business part of distributing a film as a film, not just for documentaries. And because we had a partner that understood that, they designed publicity that was effective. They designed an outreach campaign that was effective to get an audience, and so that was extremely helpful. So if you can get somebody who is strong at distributing entertainment, and they want to do a distribution of your documentary for a social issue purpose because they care about it, they can be a great partner to have by your side.
Yeah, and I would add to that, on the other side of that same coin is another aspect that depends on who's in your film. But in the case of Granito, the Maya people, especially the Xil Maya and the Quiche Maya, who a lot of the people in those communities are not literate, and so what we've done in this case, and we did this in Peru as well, we made indigenous language versions, forming teams of local indigenous people, and using local radio stations as a studio, through a whole translation process. It takes months, but we made 2 Maya language versions of the film that just got released, of Granito, and the releases were in public squares, and it's not subtitled, it's voiceover because so many people can't read. And so we've found that bringing the film back to the community in their language is very, very powerful. And I don't have any metrics for you on that, but I can tell you that when you're there and the way the film gets passed around and talked about, it's definitely having an effect.
And I would say that on a more macro scale, what I've seen, sorry, we have a delay, I guess. What I've seen, sort of the more macro answer to that question around partnerships, is that the most effective are mutually beneficial. That it's not a one-way relationship. That you're not calling up a partner to say, how can you help me and get the word out about my film? But you're calling up to say, how can this film help you achieve your mission? How can we work together to reach our mutual goals? And those are the best partnerships I've seen. I think they're totally attainable with the right partners and the right messaging. And if you do a little research about finding the partnership that most aligns with the film's goals as well.
That's great. I'm going to switch to one more question. This is from Connie, and she asks, what's the minimum number of personnel needed for an effective U.S. engagement, and what would their jobs be?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, yeah.
Connie, I'm sorry, there's no easy answer to that. Like I said, it totally depends on your goals. I've seen many times filmmakers do it themselves. It can be a one-person team. That happens. It really depends on your budget and what you want to do. Like, some filmmakers want nothing to do with the outreach and engagement campaign and want to hand it over. Like I said at the beginning, it's all about doing a really deep assessment of what kinds of skills and interest and time and money you're bringing to the table. I've seen everything from a one-person team to various roles of a 20-person team and everything in between, and that can take a lot of different shapes. It can be, a few full-time people. It can be one full-time person or a part-time person and a handful of consultants. Maybe you have a social media person. Maybe you have a press person, filling different gaps. Like I said, when you're doing your assessment of what you've got and what you need, you can have a lot of different models. There's no one way to do it. It is all about the assessment of what your team is already.
All right, thank you. I'm going to do one more. This is from Kathy Leichter. She asks, what are the approaches? What are some, sorry, here, let me do this, thanks. What are some approaches for follow-up with hosts after screenings and continuing the work once the community screenings and discussions are over? Paco, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll go back to the translation story that I just told. There, you know, in the process of putting together the team for this translation, you really, first of all, we work with people who are, in the case of the Maya translations, local indigenous leaders, and then the team that gets put together becomes a lasting unit, and they are the ones, you know, we don't live in Guatemala, they are our partners, and, you know, without them, none of these translations could happen, but also they take ownership of these films afterwards, and they're the ones who are organizing the screenings. They're the ones, you know, they let us know what impact it's had. They can fill out the Google Doc if we ask them to, just so that we have a record on the database. But more than anything is the emotional impact, and also the political organizing impact that happens, because they're using the film really for political education, showing this past, you know, of what happened to their people that has been buried, and so, you know, through the film, it awakens, especially in young people who don't get taught any of this in school, and they're trying to, they're in the process of creating a political base to bring indigenous rights up to the surface. So that's and that is really, they're doing that work. We work with them and provide media tools that they can use, but it's really, you know, I think that your partners have to really take ownership of the film. It has to become theirs.
That's great. Thank you. Roberto, do you have anything to add?
Just a very simple suggestion. Bring a notebook to the screenings. And you pass it around.
Bring a notebook?
You bring a notebook, you pass it around, you collect emails of people who watched the film. So for the first years where we had a festival run of Presunto Culpable, that's what we did. And our job very clearly was about making sure that our screenings were sold out or full. And that gives you a base of people who are going to be with you and care about how the film does. So you ask them to follow you on Twitter, you ask them to like your Facebook page, and slowly you build a net of support. This is very important for us once we wanted to show the film in Mexico, because audiences in the U.S. are very generous, and they, you know, once they saw that their film was going to be launched theatrically, people donated $10, $20 so that we could buy more posters or buy more prints of the film. And it's harder to get people to donate in countries like Mexico, where it's, you know, much harder to get someone to swipe a credit card and give you a small amount of money that you can later use for your outreach campaign. So the simple notebook suggestion,
That's great.
The names and emails work great for us.
Very helpful. Well, thank you guys. We're almost at the end of our doc chat, and I want to thank you so much for your time and expertise. And I want to thank the audience for joining us today. We will be posting the chat online, and don't forget to tune in to POV's 27th season, Monday nights at 10 p.m., starting on June 27th with Jason De Silva's When I Walk. All right.
All right.
We'll see you. We'll see you back in the fall with doc chats again.
Okay.
Take care. Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.